I promised to make a slideshow about the Ulenspiegel novel by Charles de Coster, and here it is. I plan to pitch my own stage version of the novel to my theatre society for a performance in the following year, and this slideshow is how I chose to order my thoughts in advance. Charles de Coster's Eulenspiegel, or as he called it, The Legend and the Heroic, Joyous and Glorious Adventures of Ulenspiegel and Lammergoedzak in the land of Flanders and elsewhere from 1867, stayed a non-seller during his lifetime that failed to attract an audience. Only after his death, it slowly turned into a beloved piece of Belgian and particularly Flemish national literature. National literature isn't always conceived as such. Sometimes, like the Song of the Nibelungs, for example in my own German nation, it is just turned into a piece of national literature after its creation, by people having a vested interest in the idea of their own national culture. Ulenspiegel, however, was from the start supposed to be a national hero of the still very young nation of Belgium. Before, Charles de Coster had published a collection of Flemish legends, one of which, the legend of Smetsesmee, was later turned into a German opera by Franz Schreker. Now, Charles de Coster never tried to sell his creation, Ulenspiegel and Lammergoedzak, as something that it wasn't. He never hid his own authorship, and unlike James Macpherson, who created his own Ossian songs and then sold them as ancient Scottish ones, Charles de Coster never pretended it to be an authentic piece of period literature, yet he took great care in creating such a book as it might have been written in the 16th century Flanders, or, in his opinion, should have been written, but wasn't. Therefore he needed a hero that might fit into the kind of medieval folk book or chapbook literature that he was trying to emulate. Ulenspiegel was already the title of the periodical for which Charles de Coster wrote since 1856, together with his illustrator Félicien Robes. It was a periodical about both literature and arts. Thyl Eulenspiegel as a character always had a visual component. From his first chapbook version, printed around 1510, the images were part of the iconic nature of its main character. To me, it seems visionary, clairvoyant even, that Charles de Coster would choose such a proto-comic book character as the hero of the Belgian nation, which would later become one of the most important and innovative comic book creating nations ever. Little is known about the historical Thyl Eulenspiegel. As the oldest remaining chapbook has it, he was born around 1300 near Brunswick in today's Lower Saxony, and died during the Black Death pandemic around 1350 in Mölln near Lübeck and Hamburg, where I grew up. Visiting his statue and grave in Mölln was part of my childhood upbringing. The oldest remaining chapbook, printed 15 years before the narrative of de Coster's Ulenspiegel even starts, presents Thyl Eulenspiegel as a trickster, traveling through the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, playing practical jokes on his contemporaries, exposing their stupidity and hypocrisy. Many northern German cities have at least one Eulenspiegel prank to tell that has become part of the Eulenspiegel legend. Brunswick tells this story. Thyl Eulenspiegel had taken the job as a baker's apprentice. When his master had to leave his bakery early in the morning and asked his apprentice to replace him, Eulenspiegel asked him what to bake with the already prepared dough. That was a stupid question, because they had been baking the same thing every morning, breads and buns, so the baker answered owls and monkeys. It is not known why he said that, whether he just wanted to make fun of a question he considered stupid, or whether owls and monkeys was how his guild called breads and buns, which is another way of saying who knows. What is known are the consequences. Eulenspiegel now formed and baked owls and monkeys out of the dough. Literal owls and monkeys. And then the baker came back scolding him for ruining his dough. Eulenspiegel offered to sell his owls and monkeys on the market himself, which he did, and they sold like crazy, because no one had seen baked owls and monkeys before, let alone tasted them. The baker was already reckoning with a big win when he realized Eulenspiegel had sold all his owls and monkeys and skipped town with the money. Until this day, you can buy owls and monkey cake in the bakeries of Brunswick, and there is a well with statues in the city of Brunswick commemorating the event. Statues commemorating other Eulenspiegel stories and pranks can be found in many old northern German towns. His stories have been adapted for stage, movies, operas, symphonic poems, children's and school books, yet the most extensive and original adaptation is without doubt that of Charles de Coster. His Eulenspiegel, or Ulenspiegel, consists of 5 books that are very different in size. The first book is the longest, and it remains closest to the original medieval Eulenspiegel stories, as published in the German chapbook around 1510. That was half a century before the 80 Years' War even began. In his first book, de Coster almost literally cites and reproduces a great number of the already existing German stories. The pranks Thyl pulls on the Pope, or the German Duke, and sadly also on the members of a Jewish community, are taken over word by word and without much refinement. Historical figures from the history of 16th century Netherlands appear only occasionally. Still, de Coster sets the stage for what is to come, firstly by choosing a new home for Thyl Ulenspiegel within the Flemish city of Damme, secondly by expanding the cast. The original Eulenspiegel book was a solo adventure through and through. De Coster gives to Thyl Ulenspiegel an extended family, the members of which are completely de Coster's own. His mother has a name now, Sootkin, and she's the person who loves Thyl unconditionally. His father is Claes, a charcoal burner, who is also a fish poacher, but only out of necessity, not civil disobedience or rebellion. However, he is able to teach his son both political awareness and the value of freedom. He is not above poking fun at the Catholic indulgence dealers, though. First by buying a certificate of 100 years of indulgence, then cutting it into stripes, each worth a year, and selling them for ham and beer. This is how Claes, the charcoal burner, also attracts the hatred of Jose Greipstoiver, the head of the Fishermen's Guild, who only wanted to buy a day of indulgence, but is denied his day by reason of it being too difficult to cut off. The fishmonger had already set an eye on Claes for his being a fish poacher. Now he sees him as a potential heretic too. The politically aware Claes is among the first ones to realize that the new religious laws King Charles V, father of King Philip II, seeks to pacify and keep his Netherlands Catholic with, are also a plot to fill his empty chests, because the king inherits everything an executed heretic leaves behind, except for 10%, which are given to his accuser. These 10% will lead to denunciation and get innocent people killed, Claes being one of them. The best friend of his family is the midwife Kathaline, who happens to be also a clairvoyant, besides being the most fascinating of de Coster's characters. De Coster uses her character to show Protestants and Catholics can be equally unforgiving and brutal as soon as witchcraft is involved. Very early in the book, she is falsely accused of witchcraft and put to the torture, which makes her lose her mind permanently. Despite her occasional clairvoyance, she almost succeeds in subjecting her daughter to a very unforgivable sort of abuse. We will get to that later. Yes, Kathaline has a daughter, Nele. Nele has been born out of wedlock. This is why Thyl's parents have decided to raise her as their own daughter. Even though she has to stay with her dependent mother Catilina after there is no one else left to care for her, which is for the most part of the book, she loves Ulenspiegel and takes part in his struggle in some very interesting and unexpected ways. Then there is also the kind-hearted Lamechudsak, who loves to eat and is just a little older than Ulenspiegel, and his devotion both to Eulenspiegel and his wife Calican he keeps looking for, even though she has left him out of religious delusion, is very heartwarming. He has been likened to Obelix occasionally, even though he is hardly as strong. I can see the similarity, but I would say Asterix resembles Thyl Eulenspiegel even more than Obelix resembles Lamechudsak. Young Thyl also has an uncle. Claes's brother Joost leads a hermit's life because he hates all people of all creeds unconditionally. He loves pulling pranks, though, and organizes a bizarre pilgrimage event where young men beat up each other in order to have better sex with their brides and wives afterwards. He is among the first to join the Protestants' battle against the Spanish crown. His death sets the main plot in motion, because his will leaves his brother Claes in charge of a considerable sum of the Protestant war chest. After Jose Greipsteuer, the fishmonger, has nosed out the money to be in Claes's possession, he rats out Claes to the Dutch Inquisition to get the 10% of that money as reward. Claes is burnt at the stake as a heretic, but both his wife Sutkin and his son Thyl rather endured torture than letting the fishmonger's treachery be rewarded. Having barely survived the torture, Thyl and Sutkin find out the money is already gone. Sutkin dies very soon afterwards. Catilina, who had been driven insane by the torture years ago, now believes to be a witch for real, and she has given all the money away to a man who visits her at night and to whom she is completely obedient. She calls him Hanske, her sweet devil, because a devil is what she believes him to be, and she has handed Claes's money over to him. Thyl fills a small pocket with his father's ashes to wear above his heart. "The ash is burning on my heart," is a sentence he keeps repeating countless times until the end of the novel. He is sick with thoughts of revenge and rebellion, even pushing the fishmonger into the river. He ends up seeking the counsel of Catilina, who still possesses enough of her former powers to send both Thyl and her daughter Nele into the ghost world. They are led before the Emperor and the Empress of the Ghosts, who advise them to burn the 7 which are bad, and to seek the 7 which are good, along with what they call the miraculous bond. Next morning Thyl takes his leave from his birth town Damme and his beloved Nele and begins to seek the 7. This is only the main plot of the first book. I left out something. In the same moment when Thyl is born, the heir to the German Emperor Karl is born too in Spain, and de Coster's narrative follows both their youth, upbringing and life, Thyl's and Philip II's alternately. They have the same age, yet while Philip II can age and die, Thyl, Nele and probably Lamme too stay just as young as they are at the end of the first book, because they are, as Catilina explains, the spirit, the heart and the stomach of the Flemish people. Now, the 80 Years' War that Philip II and his heirs led against his inherited Netherlands was never part of my German curriculum, only the 30 Years' War was. But Philip II was known to me via the second most important play of the Weimar classic, Don Carlos by Friedrich von Schiller. I saw it first at the age of 12, and I never forgot it ever since, nor did I forget Giuseppe Verdi's opera adaptation. it had a cast surprisingly similar to that of Star Wars. There was the unscrupulous Duke of Alba, who never hesitated to kill innocent civilists if he thought it might hurt the heretic rebellion. There was Carlos, the rebellious son to Philip II, the powerful but evil father. And then there was the mysterious figure in a monk's robe, the Grand Inquisitor, who turned out to be more dangerous and powerful than each of the others combined. Now, both Schiller's Don Carlos and de Coster's Ulenspiegel contain, as far as the character of Philip II is concerned, equal amounts of historical details and made-up BS. Friedrich Schiller and Giuseppe Verdi tried to humanize the tyrant by showing his loneliness, his need for love, his casual generosity in the face of failure, and his potential for good. De Coster's Philip II has no redeemable qualities. As a kid, he tortures and burns animals. As a man, he tortures and burns people, showing neither love nor mercy. De Coster's perspective remains that of people looking up to Philip II, like they would to a horror waxwork on a carnival, like to a crude display of evil, gore, and cruelty. It is really a long way both from Schiller and from Giuseppe Verdi. Now, would you believe that de Coster's Ulenspiegel is actually a positive, a life-affirming novel, equally heartwarming and funny? Because it is. It is walking a fine line between comedy and tragedy, setting Thyl's endearing extended family, and in particular his love to Nele, against the brutality and cruelty of Philip II's reign, setting Thyl's hilariously subversive and funny pranks against the terror and bloodshed of the 80 Years' War. Also, de Coster emulates the style of the original medieval German folkbook by adapting a pseudo-historical French, modeled after the works of the Renaissance novelist François Rabelais. This way, de Coster manages to give us all the graphic and gory details while still keeping some sort of distance that feels both historic and ironic, sometimes humorous even in the face of war. Few of the numerous adaptations have been able to walk the same fine line. Many screw it up in one way or the other. The second book tells how Thyl leaves Nele and, together with his friend Lamme Goedzak, starts to seek the prophesied Seven. No longer does de Coster copy the stories of the medieval German chapbook. The story he now writes is completely his own. It is still largely episodic, but there is a recognizable arc now. Even though Thyl has become a freedom fighter of the Netherlands, he is still searching for the right enemies to fight, the actual evil Seven. Thyl and Lamme witness and fail to prevent the iconoclasm of Antwerp 1566, guessing it will give Philip II an excuse to send the villainous and cruel Duke of Alba. Thyl has by now understood the fishmonger is not important enough to even warrant revenge. Instead, Thyl seeks allies. He realizes a revolt against the Spanish crown can only be led by a nobleman who is up to the task. Here, a lot of real-life historic figures start contributing to the story. De Coster lets Thyl spy on a secret meeting of the very nobleman who had formerly signed a petition, the so-called Compromise of the Nobles, to demand and regain the former privileges from the then governess of the Netherlands, Philip II's half-sister, Margaret of Parma. They were sent away called beggars, or Goossen, which name was later adopted by the rebels. Plot-wise, Willem of Orange, or Willem the Silent, will be the most important of those noblemen. Yet for me as a German, Count Egmont was even more interesting. I did not know him from our German curriculum either, but I did know him from the stage play Egmont by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, which I first watched at the age of 13. Goethe's characterization of the historical figures of the villainous Duke of Alba, the overwhelmed governess of the Netherlands, Margaret of Parma, and the calculating and practical Wilhelm of Orange are all surprisingly similar to de Coster's. But Egmont is different. In Goethe's play, he is much more heroic and sympathetic, and frankly much more like Mel Gibson's William Wallace than the vain, obtuse and hesitant nobleman described by de Coster. So, in some way I think de Coster's novel is not only about history as such, it also makes a meta-historical case about how their history should be written, or in Egmont's case, rewritten to take a new perspective more fitting for the Flemish people. Charles de Coster was in an interesting position when he wrote Ulenspiegel. Belgium was a sovereign country now, so in a way he no longer had to support the national and confessional narratives of the Catholic southern provinces. He could make his own. He could rewrite, or rather correct or undo the rewritings which had formerly been done to his country's history. Not only by Goethe, his version is just the most familiar to me, being a German. Having spied on their secret meeting, Thyl understands Egmont is useless to his cause, in spite of his military expertise, because he is frankly too dense to realize that even killing hundreds of heretics would no longer help him to make peace with a man like King Philip II, on whose death list he has been since the moment he signed that petition. The hope both of Lamme and Thyl lies now with Wilhelm of Orange. In the third book, Thyl and Lamme finally join the rebellion and the struggle of Wilhelm of Orange, becoming like him, Goossen themselves. They do so in many different ways. They join the army and succeed to maintain the peace between real Goossen and the hired German mercenaries. They are able to discover and to kill 3 Catholic assassins wearing black robes disguising themselves as Protestant predicants to kill Wilhelm of Orange. But Thyl also keeps playing hilariously funny pranks to sow discord among the Catholic provinces. In the Flemish Ypern, he becomes the second verger of the provost of the local St. Martin's church, a fat and greedy clergyman who keeps feasting on hoarded food and wine. Now Thyl steals his food and places the remains around the statues of the holy Martin and the other holy figures, and the provost, believing they have stolen his provisions, starts to hack all holy figures into pieces. Realizing and to hide that he had just become an iconoclast and heretic himself, the provost has to disguise his other verger as the broken figure of the holy Martin for its upcoming procession, even though the poor and intimidated verger keeps peeing on the penitents because he can't hold his water. I don't know what a Catholic says to that. I'm a Lutheran and I think it's hilarious. Lamme becomes more important too. Against his wishes, he has to duel the strong Peer, the strongest captain of the Water Goossen, and defeats him. Peer has let him win, to turn him into a legend of his own, Lamme the undefeatable, Lamme the lion, so that people may beware of impeding his way to the next theatre of war. Sex is a recurring theme throughout the novel. The Catholic relation to sex is described as inhibited and broken. It is in fact the abstinence preachers of the zealous Catholic brother Cornelis which have caused Lamme's wife Calican to leave him. In reality, brother Cornelis was in fact keen on Calican himself and intending to abuse her. Thyl is a lot more liberal in relation to sex and very comfortable with women seducing him. But sex can be dangerous too. When Lamme, still looking for his wife Calican, by mistake enters a brothel near Brugge, Thyl is enchanted by the beautiful Gilse, luring him into the brothel for a drinking contest, a song, and a table dance. Little does he know, her bored Stevenine is a Catholic spy intending to entrap and kill him for the reward. Lamme hardly manages to open Thyl's eyes to the danger he is in. They have the good sense to let an adjacent landlord go seek help and come back with 7 butcher's apprentices to take the brothel apart and make the boat Stevenine their prisoner. But even they are temporarily enticed by Geline's song and dance. Her description is among the most fascinating parts of the book, because she and her board are described almost like vampires weaving a spell over their unsuspecting prey. Meanwhile, a serial killer haunts the surroundings of Damme and the dunes of Knocke and Heist. He is called the werewolf because he leaves his victims stripped naked and robbed, yet with the bite marks of a wolf. The werewolf even almost kills Nele's mother Katalina. Thyle manages to trap and to catch the werewolf, who turns out to be an old acquaintance. It is Jose Greipsteuer, the fishmonger, and Thyl's father's former denunciator and accuser. The mask of the wolf and the bite marks had been fake, yet reflecting how the fishmonger had been turned into a wolf, a danger to his fellow human beings at first by greed and the cruel laws of Philip II's reign, then by being shunned and rejected by his fellow human beings as a result, till no longer has any wish for revenge, as he hands him over to the law. He even admits to having pushed the fishmonger into the river some 15 years ago, but since murder or attempt of murder is no longer prosecuted after 15 years, Thyle is not prosecuted either. In the 4th book, the Battle of the Goossen is taken to the sea. Ulenspiegel and Lamme help the historical Wilhelm de Lumey, Admiral of the Water Goossen, to take the important haven of Labrille. Meanwhile, Nele is finally able to apprehend and bring to justice the thief who had stolen Claes's heritage from her mother Katalina. Her sweet devil Hanske is in reality a nobleman named Jost Damman, who had dressed up like a devil, just like the fishmonger had dressed up as a wolf. Katalina was so devoted to her sweet devil, she had even offered her own daughter Nele to be abused by his friend Hilbert. But Nele had defended herself, and Damman had killed his friend shortly afterwards to keep Katalina's money for himself. He cannot be prosecuted for the murder, because it was committed over 15 years ago. Instead, both Jost Damman and Katalina are executed for witchcraft. While the nobleman dies, cursing Katalina, Katalina dies happy, because the law has not separated them but sentenced for the same crime. Nele cannot save her mother, but she is now free to join her lover Ulenspiegel's struggle. Until now, Charles de Coster has presented a black and white narrative, where the Catholic troops are the aggressor and the Protestants innocent victims. This narrative is completely turned on its head after Thyle has helped Admiral de Lumey taking Labrille. Now de Lumey is the governor and starts to execute all Catholic prisoners who won't renounce, including 19 priests and monks who had already been promised safe conduct. A soldier's promise is a golden promise. Why does de Lumey break his? Ulenspiegel asks. Having failed to liberate them, Ulenspiegel is sentenced to death for high treason by de Lumey, showing how quickly good and evil can change parts in war. Ulenspiegel is only saved because of an old Flemish law saying a single felon can be saved from the gallows if he accepts the hand of a virgin in holy marriage. This is how Nele saves him. In the 5th and last book, Lamme and Thyle continue their service for the Water Goossen. The cruel Duke of Alba has been driven out of the country and is replaced afterwards by Philip II's half-brother John of Austria. Lamme and Thyle have captured a zealous and obese priest who is calling Lamme fat. Lamme being the ship's cook, has him locked up in a cage and starts fattening him, intending to not let him out before he has at least doubled his already considerable weight. It turns out he is the very priest who had tried to take advantage of Lamme's wife Calican before. His admission Calican was successfully defending herself makes Lamme a very happy husband. Lamme and Calican finally get together again and renew their marital vows. With great ceremony, Philip II's reign as King of the Dutch States General is discontinued, as the first period of their war against the Spanish crown has been won. But the 80 Years' War is still far from over. Thyl, now married with Nele, is appointed warden of the tower to sound alarm should the Spanish dare to approach again. There they have their last vision of the ghost world. They now see that the evil 7 they were seeking are not people, but the 7 deadly sins, which are present on both sides of the conflict. But they also see the 7 virtues that the sins can and must be replaced with. The miraculous bond is the friendship between Belgium and the Netherlands, as represented by the river Scheldt, connecting the Free Netherlands with Belgium and France. Once Nele awakes from their shared dream, Ulenspiegel is already dead. Catholic priests come to rejoice over his death. But in the end, Ulenspiegel just stands up and walks, as the reports about his death were greatly exaggerated. Ulenspiegel, Nele and Lamme cannot die. They are the spirit, the heart and the stomach of Flanders. De Coster's Ulenspiegel has been adapted for film at least 4 different times, twice at least for the Dutch TV. A series for children in 1961. It was black and white and had 20 episodes. Another colored 4-parter was released by the Dutch TV in 1973. Both ran only in Dutch TV, and I can say nothing about them. 2 more adaptations were international productions with German involvement. Those I could watch entirely. The first was made by Gérard Philipe, 1957, in collaboration with the DEFA, the state-owned movie production company of Eastern Germany, then also called the Soviet Zone. The other was another 4-parter produced for TV in 1977 by the Soviet Union. I have no idea what made the topic so attractive for Soviet-controlled movie makers. The film music composer of the Russian production, Nikolai Karetnikov, produced an own opera adaptation in 1988. It was recorded in secrecy, without knowledge or involvement of the state, which would cease to exist 3 years later. So not only was the topic attractive for the Soviet film production, but also for secret critics of their state. The DEFA production emulates the paintings of Peter Bruegel and is exceedingly beautiful to look at, but it hardly ever follows de Coster's narrative. The script turns Till Ulenspiegel into the Duke of Alba's court jester. That's not in the book. The star Gérard Philipe had to direct himself, because the famous director Joris Ivens had dropped out of the project. Gérard Philipe is very sporty and attractive, and defeats the Spanish mostly by being quicker and more acrobatic, not by being more cunning or particularly inventive. That's frustrating, because it doesn't do his character justice. The movie ends up portraying the Spanish as a minor annoyance, but not as a threat. It is a family-friendly film, and it seems made for children for the most part. The drama falls by the wayside. The movie is unable to walk the thin line between comedy and tragedy like de Coster was able to. The Soviet 1977 version suffers from a similar problem. The DEFA version was too light. Now the Soviet version is just too dark and sad. It has to be given credit for being a lot closer to the plot of the novel. All the important plot points and numerous episodes I love are in place, and it succeeds, perhaps for the first time, in making Nele an integral part of Thyl's story. But Thyl never seems particularly funny. He's heroic and cunning, but not funny in the life-affirming way I had hoped for. For the TV series, the production values are quite impressive, but for me they suffer a little from substituting the medieval townscapes of the Eastern Sea for the Northern Sea, just like Werner Herzog did reversely when he substituted the Northern Sea for the Eastern Sea in 1979's Nosferatu. For a Russian and a Southern German grown up in Munich, Northern and Eastern Sea may seem exactly the same. For me, having grown up there, they're different planets. I wish it wouldn't take me out of the illusion so much, but I just can't help it. I may be too biased for a final judgment, therefore I'd rather do without. Thyl Eulenspiegel was a visually iconic, a proto-comic book character. It was only a question of when the most Belgian of art forms, the bande dessinée or comic, would try to bring the first Belgian national hero to life. The first comic adaptation was a daily newspaper strip by the animation director and comic designer Ray Goossens. He directed the first Asterix movie, Asterix le Gaulois. I already noted Asterix and Obelix share some similarities with Thyl Ulenspiegel and Lamme Goedzak. How this daily Thyl and Lamme strip relates to their namesakes in de Coster's novel, if at all, I am not able to tell. The setting seems fittingly medieval, but the strip seems rather self-sufficient and I can't make out any arc or plot. That changes in the version of Willy Vandersteen. Willy Vandersteen had been an associate of the studios of J. I already mentioned his Suze and Wiske and Bessie series and his many adaptations of works of Karl May during the last slideshow. Unlike Ray Goossens' daily strip, Willy Vandersteen's version has the almost epic length of 66 pages. Unfortunately, the German version is missing the colors. Yet the scenery, taking inspiration from Renaissance paintings, the lighting, the weather, the costumes, and most of all, the Goossens ships are a sight to behold. Very much like in Willy Vandersteen's Karl May adaptations, the main focus is on action, and it takes great liberty with de Coster's narrative, leaving out Kataline's torture, Hanske, Stevenine the fishmonger, and in fact leaving out or exchanging the majority of all historic characters, with the curious exception of Admiral de Lumet, whose word-breaking cruelty is conveniently left out as well. Frustratingly redundant narrative texts and too much plot within too few panels leave almost no room for the characterization of his cast. Ulenspiegel's superior intellect and life-affirming wit is hardly ever present. The malicious nature of his pranks isn't present at all, and Thyl acts like Tintin rather than Ulenspiegel as a result. Willy Vandersteen's second Ulenspiegel comic shares the Tintinization of de Coster's original characters, yet this time the story is a lot more concise, to the point, and less convoluted and thrown together than the first part, perhaps because Willy Vandersteen is no longer following de Coster, but telling a story all by his own, combining the two themes he was most comfortable with, a medieval adventure and the Wild West. His best Ulenspiegel adaptation is probably the one that doesn't even use Ulenspiegel's name. But in the 10-part comic book series De Goossen by Willy Vandersteen, the variants of de Coster's original characters are still recognizable, just like Vandersteen's former associate Frank Szell's Silverpeel is a variant of Winnetou. Thyl is still serving Wilhelm of Orange, but he is now called Hannes. Nele is now called Werle and Lamme is now called Tamme, yet all three act probably even more like de Coster's characters than the main cast of Willy Vandersteen's first adaptation ever did. No longer having to follow any of de Coster's narratives, Willy Vandersteen can also add interesting elements of fantasy not present in the novel. The Hungarian comic designer Attila Fazekas does a better job bringing the brutality of the Spanish reign to life. His German adaptation of Charles de Coster's novel is very beautiful to look at. The action is captivating, but it suffers from a really bad case of the Frankenstein syndrome in that it takes its inspiration not from the original novel, but from its first movie adaptation. Fazekas uncritically adapts elements from 1957's movie that were never in the novel, like turning Thyl into Alba's court jester. Attila Fazekas must be given credit for the best characterization of Thyl's father Claes, teaching his son the value of freedom. Unfortunately, that's the best scene of Fazekas' adaptation, even though he follows the family-friendly movie a lot more closely than he follows de Coster. Halfway into his adaptation, he decides to turn Ulenspiegel into an unscrupulous killer, using a garrote more than he does his wit. No wonder Lamme, his good conscience, is absent from the comic most of the time. The action is good, but turning Ulenspiegel, the subversive prankster and principled soldier, into a stealthy assassin just feels off to me. The endearing humor of the character and the narrator's ironic distance are missing almost completely. It suffers from a similar problem like other adaptations. They are not able to walk the delicate line between tragedy and comedy like Charles de Coster did. The Willy Vandersteen's version is too light, Attila Fazekas is too dark. A better job was done by Dino Battaglia in 1977's Thyl Ulenspiegel. His designs are breathtakingly beautiful, rendering lifelike Gothic townscapes and giving Thyl Ulenspiegel back his German red fool cap and bells and his superior, sometimes malicious wit. Much shorter than Willy Vandersteen, Dino Battaglia presents only a very few select and severely cut, but highly diverse and entertaining episodes from Charles de Coster's original novel. Thyl's father's death is part of the narrative again. So is the murderous brother of Stevenine, and so are the historic characters of Wilhelm of Orange and Admiral de Lumey. But this time, Battaglia does it right. Admiral de Lumey sentences Thyl to death as a traitor, because he was trying to set the 19 martyrs free. But now Nele steps forth to save him. Short as it is, it might still be the best comic book adaptation of the novel yet. The best adaptations of de Coster's novel are perhaps to be found neither in the movies nor comics, but in music and opera. The history of Ulenspiegel opera had some sort of, let's say, rough start. The first opera adaptation of de Coster's novel was both written and composed by the German composer Walter Braunfels, born 1882 in Frankfurt. Now, Braunfels writes very beautiful music. He isn't modern or atonal like his contemporary Arnold Schönberg, but he isn't popularly eclectic like his contemporary Richard Strauss either. One might say he represented a third way that wasn't really present elsewhere in Austrian or German music in or after the World Wars. Now his Ulenspiegel opera, after de Coster's novel, contains occasionally beautiful music too, but its libretto, written by Walter Braunfels himself, is god-awful. It is the story of Ulenspiegel's political awakening, interspersed with dialogue taken literally from Goethe's Egmont. Lamme isn't present, neither is Thyl's mother, uncle, or any of the other supporting characters besides his father Claes and Nele. Thyl possesses no political awareness at all. He makes fun of Spaniards and Dutch rebels indiscriminately. Only after his father and Nele have both been killed, he is finally ready to take the Catholic threat seriously. Now he is off to war, the end. In that time, before the First World War, stage plays about interconfessional wars were often used, or rather abused, to get the German audience riled up against the Catholic states of southern Europe, particularly France and its allies. August Strindberg's Martin Luther play was used very similarly. There is a lot to like about the music, but Braunfels' attitude towards war changed considerably, as you can hear in his Te Deum 1921. He himself became a Catholic and never touched his Ulenspiegel again. The best adaptations of de Coster's novel were in fact written during the Second World War, and the fascist or National Socialist reigns leading up to it. They were composed by people dissenting and realizing how much the fascist regimes and National Socialist occupation in fact resembled Philip II's reign in the Netherlands. This is equally true of Luigi Dallapiccola, Vladimir Vogel, and Jan van Gilse. Luigi Dallapiccola's Il Prigionero, the composition of which began around 1940, isn't actually even an Ulenspiegel opera. It is the adaptation of a historical and psychological horror story written by Auguste Villiers de l'Isle Adam, the Edgar Allan Poe of Paris. The original horror story was actually about a rabbi imprisoned and tortured by the Spanish Inquisition under King Philip II, because he wouldn't renounce the faith of his fathers. Luigi Dallapiccola turned this rabbi into a Dutch Protestant. He also added a scene wherein this character's mother has a vision of King Philip II turning into death incarnate. Very likely this scene was inspired by Caterina's visions of King Philip II. The Protestant prisoner already knows the day of his execution has arrived when one of his guards addresses him as fratello, meaning brother, but it can also mean comrade. This guard now feeds him news and images of the Protestant rebellion having defeated King Philip II's troops. All these images have been taken almost literally from Charles de Coster's novel. Hearing these news, the prisoner starts to feel something he doesn't at first recognize because he hasn't felt it in years. He feels hope. I won't spoil the ending for you. Many opera lovers are hesitant and irritated by dodecaphonic or 12-tone composers like Luigi Dallapiccola, since their many dissonant chords sometimes make it hard to know what exactly, if anything at all, they are supposed to make you feel. I can tell you this, once you're listening to Dallapiccola's opera, you will know exactly what to feel, and you will most definitely feel it. I watched the opera 20 years ago, and it took me completely by surprise. For me, it was the most emotional opera house visit in decades. Should you get the chance, watch it, by all means. Vladimir Vogel, who was born 1896, was a dodecaphonal or 12-tone composer too. But like with Luigi Dallapiccola, his music can sound terrifying and scary, but also very beautiful, lyrical and emotional. The 8 years younger Luigi Dallapiccola had great respect for Vladimir Vogel's music, particularly for his oratorio Thyl Claes after Charles de Coster. It was composed almost concurrently with Dallapiccola's Prigionero, but it is not an opera. The story is told by a solo soprano and orchestra, 2 narrators, 1 female and 1 male, and a chorus, mostly chanting, not singing. I found that very irritating. It seemed to me that as long as the chorus kept just chanting rhythmically, but without pitch, the music wouldn't really start. When in fact for Vladimir Vogel, the chanting itself is music, his music. One can compare Vogel's chorus to the compositions of the political or communist Agitprop movement by the likes of Hanns Eisler, with whom Vladimir Vogel was very well acquainted. But while in Hanns Eisler's and Bert Brecht's Die Maßnahme, the chorus is typically the voice of the collective, the party, standing mostly for reason and all positive political forces. In Vogel's Thyl Claes, it is just the voice of the people. It can stand for righteous rebellion, but it also can and does chant for a witch, Catilina, and heretics to be burnt at the stake. It has those 2 faces. The first part is almost structured like a passion by either Krzysztof Penderecki or Johann Sebastian Bach. Till Ulenspiegel is introduced at his birth like a messiah, destined to defeat the forces of evil as represented by the same-aged King Philip II. His father Claes is, at the end, sacrificed like a messiah, like Jesus at the end of the Passion, to ensure the political awakening, resurrection and redemption of his son Thyl. This seemed a little too much for my taste, even though the similarities and the allusions to the genre of the Passion left a lasting impression by themselves. The funny, the spirited and subversive prankster Thyl is present only very shortly in this first part, at the age of 15. But there is also a love scene between Nele and Thyl, using the traditional form of a chaconne over a fixed bass line. The chaconne d'amour is probably the best piece of the whole, and is remarkably lyrical and beautiful. I have to restrain myself from giving a final verdict because, sadly, the second part of the oratorio hasn't been recorded yet. I have no idea how it sounds or how it ends. The third Ulenspiegel opera was composed at the same time by the Dutch composer Jan van Gilse, but I am going to delay it for now because I want to save it for last. Nikolai Karetnikov had already composed the score of the Russian TV adaptation in 1977, when 10 years later he started in secrecy to record Thyl Eulenspiegel, a 2-act opera version of his own. Even parts of his very own score are used again within. I have a weird respect for it, because of all the adaptations I experienced, it is most like my own stage adaptation, which I'm still trying to pitch to my very own theatre society for a performance in the following year. Nikolai Karetnikov is very much like the better-known Alfred Schnittke, a polystylist using contemporary styles alternating and intermingling with recognizably older and historic ones. In Thyl Eulenspiegel, Karetnikov uses forms of medieval plain chant and minnesang, baroque fugue, song and dance music, gigue, and most emotionally for me, sarabande or pavan at the end. Those styles are not only used illustratively, but also for dramatic contrast. The Song of the Rainbow Proprietors, who is, in Karetnikov's version, both the dancing sex bomb Jeline and her murderous ward in one person, is written in late Renaissance style and is great fun to listen to. Easily my favorite version of that particular scene in any adaptation. Nikolai Karetnikov, particularly in the first act, includes some scenes that seem inspired by the TV series rather than the original novel, but during the first and second act he manages to find a voice and a version that is very much his own. He screws up the original sequence, occasionally screwing up the history as well, like setting the petition of the noblemen Egmont, Horn and Orange, their so-called compromise, before Philip II even becomes king in the first place. Karetnikov begins with the baptism of Thyl, reciting the Catholic liturgy, which, like any good Lutheran or Protestant, I know solely from the movie The Godfather. Do you denounce the devil and all his works and empty promises? Yes, I renounce. It was completely bewildering to me why Karetnikov would waste my time with that strange liturgy, and without even one single brutal mob murder interspersed between the lines. But in the very last scene, or the last act, the liturgy is repeated again, and after all that bloodshed and sadness, finally understanding the at first bewildering structure was an emotional moment that took me completely by surprise. I was crying like a baby. Karetnikov also has the best Lamme arc, the second best Nele arc, and the best fishmonger arc. The fishmonger's greed for the money which he believes to be in Claes's possession causes Claes to be executed as a heretic. In an intense scene, both Thyl and his mother are tortured alternately, but since they don't want the fishmonger to be rewarded, they prefer to keep being tortured until Mother Sutkin is dead, and Thyl is trapped between life and death in a completely original scene by Karetnikov meeting Christ, the Holy Virgin, and the devil himself. The devil, however, rejects him because, as it is, he has hardly need for him to do his work. While Thyl and Lamme help the Goossen to take La Brille, the fishmonger, still greedy for Claes's hidden money, has Nele's mother executed for witchcraft too. This is one of the very few times that the character of Catiline actually has a dramatic function. In the other versions, she is rather a narrative device, telling the protagonists all the things about King Philip that they would otherwise have no possibility to know. Since Thyl doesn't want his Admiral de Lumé to execute the 19 martyrs of La Brille, he is sentenced to death himself. Nele saves him by taking him as her husband. Now that Lamme has finally found his lost wife Kaleken, he takes his leave from Thyl and Nele because he has aged like other men, while Nele and Thyl haven't aged a day since they left Damme. Returning home to resume their actual own life, they find their house in ruins, and the fishmonger still looking for their money, but in vain. His greed has finally driven him insane. No werewolves here. The fishmonger's villain arc may be worthy of Carmai rather than de Coster, but it seems strangely fitting and is very emotionally and powerfully executed. The best fishmonger arc in any adaptation, including Jan van Gilse's. Now, no longer having even an enemy, Nele and Thyl drink the magic potion left by Mother Catiline. Awakening after their last vision, Nele finds Thyl has died, but he very soon awakens again to speak his own liturgy, and instead of renouncing the devil and all his works again, he now believes in and praises good, love, joy, and freedom, and leaves the stage dancing, which is worded differently but fitting well with de Coster's advice, instead of exterminating the 7 deadly sins to find 7 virtues to replace them. The opera, like the TV series, lies heavily on the sad side of the story, but manages in the end to walk the fine line and allow a glimmer of hope. I love it. I just love Jan van Gilse's opera Thyl a little better. Jan van Gilse composed his opera Thyl concurrently with those of Luigi Dallapiccola and Vladimir Vogel. But his opera is neither modern nor dodecaphonal. It stands in the same late Romantic tradition as his teacher Engelbert Humperdinck and perhaps to a lesser extent Max Reger and Richard Strauss, whom he hated, not only because Strauss was collaborating with the Nazis, but also because of his attempt to persuade van Gilse to do the same thing. Both his sons died fighting for the resistance. Jan van Gilse does something in his Thyl opera none of the other composers had done before. Not only does he use the actual Flemish language, he also uses historic songs from the very time and place where the narrative is set. Charles de Coster had used the lines from the original Goossen war song, Slaat op den Trommele van Dirre dan Doine. Franz Schreker took over the same lines into his 1932 opera Der Schmied von Gent after Charles de Coster's Smets is Me, but Franz Schreker only uses the lines. Jan van Gilse uses the original Renaissance melody, and he does not use it only as one might expect as a war song and march. The traditional melody goes like this, forgive me for my terrible German accent. Slaat op den Trommele van Dirre dan Doine, slaat op den Trommele van Dirre dan Dos. Slaat op den Trommele van Dirre dan Doine, Vive le Goose is Nudelus. Please forgive my terrible German accent. Also, for the lump in my throat I get singing this. It's because of reasons. Now, when Thyl has left his beloved Nele behind in the first act to flirt with the noblewoman of Dutzele, she sings a sad love song, but mind the melody of it. Do you recognize it? Recognize it? It's the traditional Goossen war song, Slaat op den Trommele, which Thyl will sing minutes later. Jan van Gilse is telling us here in his music that even as the two lovers, Thyl and Nele, are walking in opposite directions, their connection is unbroken, and their suffering, never mind the different forms it is going to take, is ultimately still the same. The fishmonger is given additional motives for betraying Thyl's father to the authorities. He is in love with Nele too, and wants her for himself. Once Thyl's father is executed, Thyl immediately starts to sing the traditional Slaat op den Trommele, but now Van Gilse's variation uses a meter with 4 beats instead of the historical 3 beats and adds a sharp snare drum. It is no longer a historical song. Instead, Jan van Gilse has in essence turned it into a contemporary 1940s march of resistance. Now Thyl and Nele have to say goodbye as he is marching off to war and has to leave her behind. How that sharp march of resistance is played simultaneously with and set against Nele's and Thyl's intense love theme, a love theme worthy of any Bernard Herrmann score. I do not mean that mockingly, I just can't think of any higher praise. This is the moment where I realized how intense, how big and masterful this opera actually is. The second act presents another version of one of my favorite chapters, the incident at Stevenina's brothel, The Rainbow. I like Karetnikov's version of Geline's song just a little better, but at least in Jan van Gilse's version, when the 7 butchers' apprentices are starting to take the brothel apart, you can finally hear their ambiguous toast in the original Flämisch. In the third and last act, Jan van Gilse's marching variation of the traditional Goossen song celebrates their victory of La Brille. Thyl can even bring the fishmonger to justice, but when Admiral Delaunay starts executing the 19 martyrs of La Brille, Thyl's unwavering dissent is very powerfully and dramatically realized, reproducing de Coster's original dialogue. Soldatenwort is Guldenwort. As expected, Thyl is sentenced to death and saved by Nele. And hearing their powerful love theme again after 1.5 hours, I have to say that's a moment neither Braunfels, nor Vogel, nor Karetnikov are able to compete with. A funeral march tells us about Thyl's death, but Jan van Gilse manages to resurrect him and walk the line between tragedy and comedy just fine. There was a production of the opera Thyl 6 years ago by the Studentenkonzert of Utrecht, where Jan van Gilse had worked for 5 years between 1917 and 1922. Very much like the revival of Walter Braunfels's Ulenspiegel opera, it was performed in a very unusual and special location, the great hall of the National Militär Museum. sadly, the performance was missing about 40 minutes out of 170, so actually they performed only 3/4 of it. I might have been tempted to do the same thing. So far I have told you only about the dramatic content of the opera, but the original novel by Charles de Coster wasn't a drama, it was an epic, and all the adaptations of Vogel, Karetnikov and Van Gilse respect that in different ways by adding epic elements, or more precisely, narrative elements, forms, scenes or characters that are just narrating events but not taking part in them. Jan van Gilse and his librettist Hendrik Lind have added 3 such characters, and all 3 have been drastically reduced in the version of Utrecht. The first is the owl, Bubulus Bub, to whom the foreword of de Coster's novel had been attributed. It has been cut entirely from the version of Utrecht. Then there is Nele's clairvoyant mother Catiline. She has been cut severely. And then there is a ballad singer introducing the second act with a mockingly ambiguous ballad or song about King Philip II's love life. That has been cut severely too. Unlike the Catiline in Karetnikov's version, Van Gilse's Catiline isn't really a dramatic character. As a clairvoyant, she is just telling the audience what's going to happen and what the dramatic characters themselves are not able to tell you. She is a narrative device, a means to tell a story she isn't herself being part of. At some point in the second act, she cries for her diabolical lover Hanske, and nothing else ever comes out of that cry. The audience never learns who or what Hanske is. It seems like a relic from the original novel that has no real part in the drama and therefore could or should be cut. Also, both Bubulus Bub the owl and Catiline are speaking roles, so one could argue if they actually even contribute anything to the music. But what have we learned from Vladimir Vogel, his oratorio Thyl class and its chanting chorus? Spoken text can, very much like chanted lyrics, itself be music. You cannot cut the spoken text out of a Vladimir Vogel composition just because it isn't sung. When Catiline speaks in Dutch, het vuur en gaat, de ziel wil weg. I had read that sentence several dozens of times, both in German and French, but it wasn't until I heard Catiline chanted in Dutch that I actually and emotionally understood what it meant. I can't stress enough how important this part is to the intended emotional experience, of which the audience of the Utrecht performance was just robbed. The spoken owl and the ballad singer introducing the second act, they are there for a reason too. It isn't just about what they themselves are contributing or not contributing to the story of Thyl and Nele. It is about the effect they have on the epic, the narrative devices telling the story. They are necessary because they create humor, help keeping the fine line between tragedy and comedy, like Charles de Coster's original book does, by creating an ironic distance, keeping you from being overwhelmed and paralyzed by emotion, and help you stay critically minded. Nazis want to paralyze you with emotion. Resistant fighters do not and should not. Cutting off 40 minutes can destroy the very balance Van Gilse and Lind worked so hard to maintain. I can understand why the cuts were made, and I can quite objectively say that it was wrong to make them. And Mr. David Porcelain, if you are hearing that by any chance, if you still want to produce that record, do it right, or don't do it at all. No half things. No one enjoys being cheated. That being said, it was good that the performance took place, and I hope there are more, many more to come in the future. The opera definitely deserves it. Until this day, I believe it is the best adaptation of the novel yet. This is where the official slideshow ends. Thank you for watching, and you are very welcome to discontinue now. I just leave with a summary of my own stage version as a final unofficial addendum. It could never compete with any of the masterpieces I already mentioned. I don't care, because it doesn't try to. It is spoken theatre and takes about 1 hour and 50 minutes to perform, not counting the break in the middle. I have added all my personal favorite episodes, Thyl bugling or failing to bugle for King Charles V, Catilina's vision of King Philip's coronation, Thyl poking fun at the Pope, Claes selling pieces of his letter of indulgence, being accused by the fishmonger and executed by the Inquisition, Thyl leaving his beloved Nele to fight the Spanish, Thyl outwitting and turning the provost of St. Martin into an iconoclast, Thyl's and Lamme's failure to prevent the iconoclasm of Antwerp and the subsequent arrival of the Duke of Alba. Their failure to win Count Egmont for their cause ends the first part. The second part begins with Thyl and Lamme joining Wilhelm of Orange, and Lamme becoming a legend against his will for defeating the strong Captain Pierre. It continues with Thyl being seduced by the vampiresque barmaid and Catholic Mata Hari Jeline, and being rescued by Lamme and the butchers. Nele bringing the former lover of her mother to justice only to lose them both to the witch trial, Thyl defeating the werewolf of Damme, who turns out to be his old enemy, the fishmonger. Since it is written for a German audience, I included as many allusions and citations from Tannhäuser's Rome narrative, Goethe's Egmont, and Schiller's Don Carlos as I possibly could, but not only as Easter eggs, also as a meta-narrative about the many competing ways their history can be told and has been told in the different cultures of Germany and the Netherlands. An added framework plot involves Admiral de Lumet visiting Thyl in prison at the night before his execution for high treason because he tried to set the martyrs of La Brille free. In this version, Admiral de Lumet and Thyl have met before, but the Admiral cannot recognize Thyl because he hasn't aged and therefore failed to become the man the Admiral expected him to become. I experienced something very similar in my own life. This gives Admiral de Lumet and Thyl the possibility to each tell their own version of Thyl Ulenspiegel's story and to compete in the meta-narrative for what the true legacy of Ulenspiegel could be or should be. Just like Van Gilse competed with the SS about what the true legacy of Ulenspiegel was. Because the character still can be used and abused this way if you do not address it in some capacity. Note that the German painter Erich Klahn, who created several thousand beautiful aquarelles about de Coster's Ulenspiegel, a lot of which I have presented here in this very slideshow, was an ardent admirer of both Charles de Coster and Adolf Hitler. In the end, Admiral de Lumet has to accept he has become the enemy of a man he once respected, yet he continues to deny him because he cannot give up his ideology, at which point he has kind of become the Grand Inquisitor of Dostoevsky and therefore his own worst enemy. But he cannot deny Nele once she arrives to rescue her beloved Thyl, and so they are both set free. The end. We might do it next year or we might do it never. Thanks for listening.